All right, welcome everyone to the Match Clinic. It's a follow-up to the Match overview session from last week. You have Gordon Levine and Mike Thomas here from ICF as your primary presenters. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, today we've got a quick recap on what we've discussed previously. We're going to hop into some story problems, and then we're going to give you a little a taste of further reading in the event that Match really gets your engine going. So Match recap, and again, the joke here is that the man is wearing a cap. I really had to reach for the recap pun there. As an overview, ESG requires state recipients like HCD to supplement their ESG program in an amount that equals their fiscal year grant. That supplement is called match. It's also referred to as a one-for-one match. And what it means is for any given ESG award, you're required to provide the same amount of funds from another source as match. Thank you, Tuesday. We try hard around here. The exception, as we highlighted, is the first, they refer to as the first $100,000, but it's $100,000 of match is waived. It's not required to be matched, but the benefit of that must pass down to the subrecipients that are least capable of providing match contributions. And the way in which you determine that is according to your policy. So you need a policy that says, this is how we will determine who is least capable of providing match, and we pass the benefit of that unmatched $100,000 down to them. Match can be either cash or non-cash, also referred to as in kind. Cash is a direct contribution. In kind is donations of time, supplies, buildings, anything else that is not cash. ESG program income is counted as match. It's a little uncommon to see, but it's not out of the question. Rapid rehousing is kind of your most common area of program income in terms of like return security deposits, but program income from ESG both counts as match and is required to be used as match. Finally, match is the recipient's responsibility, which means HCDs. You may pass the match requirement along to your subrecipients, but that has to be done in accordance with your policy, and it has to be established by contract, which I understand that you do, but that's where that requirement lives. And so your contract should spell it out really clearly. Our next slide going here. These are the golden rules of match eligibility. Obviously, gold is not a color that PowerPoint does, so we've got orange. Golden rule number one is that it has to be acceptable to ESG. Acceptability is defined in the ESG program interim rule. Acceptable sources are private dollars like cash donations and fundraising, public dollars, which include other federal dollars, but also state dollars, so state general purpose revenue, local general purpose revenue, in-kind donations, which again includes donations of property and equipment, but also volunteer time, and finally ESG program income. Golden rule number two is that it has to be acceptable to the source. So whoever's providing the match has to say that it cannot disallow itself from matching ESG. So all things are considered eligible by default unless the destination source disallows it, other than ESG itself. Private dollars are almost always eligible. For them to be ineligible, somebody would have to say explicitly, no, you can't use this to match ESG. I've never seen that happen. Local and state public dollars are eligible unless they prohibit matching federal funds generally or ESG specifically. That's also unusual. It does happen, but it's pretty unusual. And finally, federal dollars, as I said, are eligible unless they prohibit matching other federal funds in general or ESG specifically. That's a little bit more common. And that prohibition can be the result of either a statutory prohibition, so it can say we don't match ESG, or it can be the result of a fundamental mismatch between the projects that make expenses ineligible. So for example, home TBRA cannot be used as match for ESG because their programs are incompatible with each other, even though the statute says they can in theory be used. Finally, golden rule number three, it has to be an eligible cost. Eligible meaning that if ESG paid for it, the cost would be ESG eligible. For cash, it has to be spent on a cost or activity that would otherwise be eligible, meaning if you're spending it on something, you should go to the ESG interim rule and find where it says the thing is eligible. If it's not in there, then it can't be used as match. For in-kind donations, leasing or purchasing the item has to be an eligible cost under the relevant program component. So the distinction being drawn here is even if it's benefiting program participants, it has to still be an eligible cost under the program. It can't be like, we also took them out for ice cream. Unless ice cream is an eligible cost under ESG, it might benefit the participants, but it's not an eligible source of match. In-kind services, as well as real goods, property, buildings, etc., have to be valued at rates that are consistent with those being paid for similar work at the organization, or if there is not similar work being paid for, if there's not similar work being performed by the organization, it has to be valued fairly in comparison to the general market. So what we're talking about there is if internally you pay for, if you have like a behavioral health staff person on staff at your organization, and you have a behavioral health specialist volunteer, the value of the volunteer has to be comparable to the value of your in-house person. If you don't have an in-house person, then it needs to be comparable to other behavioral health specialists performing similar work in the community. There are additionally special rules for non-cash contributions that, if paid for by ESG, would be indirect costs. We are not indirect cost experts, and so we redirect you to the relevant citation for details. I would add that we will be having an indirect costs session coming up for, I think, our new and non-trad providers in the nearish future. And so if you really want to get into indirect costs, that's kind of our nearest upcoming opportunity to do that with some folks who are really expert on it in a way that, that I am not, at least. Finally, an acronym refresh. SO is street outreach, ES is emergency shelter, HP is homelessness prevention, RRH is rapid rehousing, and FY stands for fiscal year, which I always get wrong. I always say funding year, which I shouldn't. Moving along to the meat of today, we have some story problems. For some reason, someone was writing in a white book with a white pencil. Generally speaking, all of our story problems today feature Community Action Incorporated, a fictional homeless services provider in California that is one of HCD's sub-recipients. It receives ESG funding for each of ESG's program components and has some funding for admin as well. So our first question today is where would you like to start? We've provided more story problems than we can get through in an hour, and so we want to hear what you're interested in. So we're going to have a poll coming up here in a second. Let us know where you want to start, and we'll circle back to the others as we get to them. As a reminder for today, these polls are anonymous. Your answers are anonymous. And so please do answer honestly, bravely, and thoughtfully. Everybody's like waking up, like, oh God, we have to self-direct into what component we want to start with, and we have to adventure.
And some people put it in the chat, so I'm not sure if you also responded, but I'm going to go ahead and close the poll because it looks like everyone wants the same.
Okay, let's see. Well, let's see the results. I'm excited. Okay, a third of you don't care, and everybody else wants rapid. So no one wants anything else. All right, rapid it is. All right, start with rapid and see if the slide transition works. Yes, score. Just trying out new stuff. All right, I think I'm up first on this one. So CAI's executive director is friends with Antonio. Antonio owns a company based in Venice that does a lot of business in California. Antonio donates $1 million to Community Action. Antonio's only requirement is that Community Action use this money to fund rental assistance. Can Community Action count Antonio's donation as a match for its rapid project? Okay, Connie, I see your question there. I'm going to try and make sure that we've got time at the end of this presentation to catch anything that we don't touch on directly.
Yeah, I'm going to drop a quick answer in the chat for it, and then we can talk it through later too.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, Tuesday, I see your comment there. It's not an elephant so much as a blue whale. It's much larger. All right, cool. 2/3 of you say yes. 17% split evenly say no or maybe. Let's see what the answer is here. Answer is yes. Private funds are an eligible source of cash match, and rental assistance is an eligible cost under ESG Rapid. It is, of course, absolutely eligible. Absolutely. Mike, over to you.
All right, so we're going to talk in this one about a bedroom set donation. So Beatrice is a community service or a community member. She reads an article in the local newspaper about how people experiencing homelessness often can't afford furniture when they move into federally funded housing. She donates her old bedroom set to CAI's Rapid Rehousing Project to help. CAI values the bedroom set at $500. Can CAI count Beatrice's bedroom set as match for its Rapid Rehousing Project? So we will throw the poll up there and see what everyone thinks. All right, we've got 50% said no, 33% said yes, and we had 17% that said maybe, which is usually a good answer with ESG. We say maybe a lot, but let's see what the answer is for this one. The answer is no. This cannot be counted as match. And the reason this cannot be counted as match is that it is not an eligible cost under ESG Rapid Rehousing. So donated goods can, in fact, be an eligible source of non-cash match. But remember, it has to be something eligible under the particular thing where it is being used as match. So furniture cannot be used as match under Rapid Rehousing because it is not an eligible cost under Rapid Rehousing. And back to you, Gordon.
Thank you. It's a tricky question. All of these are going to be tricky. And please do, as you're having questions about these, drop them in the chat, talk with each other, talk at us. Interactivity does not have to stop at the edge of the PowerPoint. Yeah. Caliban owns a 20-unit apartment building. Several community action participants already live there, and Caliban thinks they're great tenants. The next time a unit becomes available, Caliban offers the first 12 months in that unit free of charge to any participant in Community Action's Rapid Project. Can Community Action count the fair market value of the free of charge lease as match? I'm going to reiterate that one because it's got a couple of twists and turns. We've got a 20-unit apartment building that already provides housing to several Community Action Rapid participants. The next time a unit becomes available there, the owner of the apartment building offers the first 12 months of, in that unit to that participant free of charge. Can Community Action count the fair market value of that lease as match? What do you think? I was going to hold off until the end and be like, does anybody know where what source we're drawing these names from? And right into the Rapid one. Dead giveaway. All right, same as last time. 2/3 of you say yes, and the other third is split evenly between no and maybe. The answer is, of course, yes. A donated lease is considered a non-cash contribution. It is a contribution, it's non-cash, but it's something, it's eligible. And rental assistance is an eligible cost under ESG Rapid. However, over to you, Mike.
Yep, we're going to do another lease one. And like Gordon said, these are a little tricky by design because match is tricky. So we wanted to kind of reflect that. So Duncan is the CAI rapid rehousing participant who receives the free 12 months in Caliban's apartment building. The first 8 months of the lease fall within CAI's current fiscal year 2021 ESG contract. The last 4 months of the lease fall within CAI's upcoming fiscal year 2022 ESG contract. So you've got 2 fiscal years there, 2 different contracts. Under which contract year or years should CAI count the value of the donated lease? And so you've got your options here. Would they count it only under the current fiscal year, only the upcoming fiscal year, either fiscal year but not both, either fiscal year or both of them? So you've got a few options there. And yes, this is a particularly tricky one. So let's see what everyone thinks about it.
I can tell people are thinking because the answers are slower to come in.
Yep. 6 people dropped off a camera. Notepad with a pencil. Fiscal year 21.
Just think of the first time ESG program administrator doing the accounting on this. So it looks like we've got 29% said only the current fiscal year, 14% said either but not both, 29% said either or both, and another 29%. So we've got a pretty even match with the 29% there. So yeah, we've got a good spread. Let's see what the answer is. So the answer is both fiscal years, divided according to the actual value per month in each fiscal year. That's how you would record that. The best approach to doing that is to just record the match every month as you go. That's going to make things so much easier for your accounting people and any other finance staff dealing with tracking this, your grant administrators. And it also allows you, depending on how you report your match, if you're reporting match monthly, that gives you an easy monthly, amount towards your match if you're recording this every month. So that's how you would do it. It would count towards both fiscal years, divided based on the months in which it was paid. And the best practice is to record it monthly.
Yeah, that's the hardest question in here, I think. So good job, everybody. We love to see good spreads of answers because it means y'all are wrestling with the question. So thank you for engaging it with us. So Community Action also operates a COC program funded rapid project. They would like to serve a participant named Edward with a combination of COC program and ESG rapid, using each to match the other. Federal statute does allow ESG and COC program funds to match each other. Can Community Action serve Edward with both COC program and ESG rapid, using each to match the other? This one's also hard. But important because people want to do it all the time.
I will say without hesitation, I worked for a nonprofit years ago that did do this, and they were doing it incorrectly.
Mm-hmm. I worked for a very large organization that did it correctly, but it took, it was a lift. Okay, 20% say yes, 20 maybe, and the balance 60% say no. Let's have a look. Maybe it's complicated is the answer. Technically, they can match each other. And since both of them fund, both ESG and COC fund rapid, it's really tempting. It's so tempting to see them as match for each other. However, each funding source's rapid component is like 90% the same and 10% different. And those differences can really get in the way. Most of those rules can be reconciled, but that process is complicated. It requires really strong project design, really strong implementation, and it usually requires somebody whose job is at least like part-time to make sure that the two of those are working correctly. The HMIS data alone is very complicated. The bottom line is it's possible, but go carefully. Both the project design and individual costs have to be checked against each of the interim rules to make sure that they're compliant and eligible, which incidentally is exactly what people should be doing with any match source But in this particular case, we know that there are conflicts that need to be navigated around. And I'm sorry, Mike, I stepped on your slide.
No, that's totally fine. The only thing I would even add there, I think, is even if you are doing this correctly, if you have done this completely correctly, you still have to make sure that you're not double matching by claiming ESG as match for COC and then COC as match for ESG, because you cannot do that. You can only use one of them as match for the other and not do the other thing. So even if you're doing it correctly, you have to make sure that you're not double dipping on the match in that way.
Yep, that's a great point. Incidentally, in case any of you ever want to know, the right way to do that under almost any circumstances to use the COC money to match ESG, because COC only has a 25% match requirement. And so you use COC to match ESG and then something else to match COC. So you leverage a bunch of money downstream.
Yep.
All right. Where do you want to go next? We've eliminated rapid. Nobody else wanted to go anywhere else. I'm looking at this poll, and I was thinking of this earlier, that like, what happens if everybody just wants to do one of these? Are they going to troll us and keep answering that even though that section is done? Am I going to have to like riff match questions? All right, half of you want to do emergency shelter, and a third of you have no preference, and street outreach is kind of up there too. But emergency shelter seems to be the primary vote. Let's go there. I'm up first there. So Community Action has operated its ESG funded shelter, Sweet Dreams, for 30 years. A wealthy donor, Mr. Oberon, has written Community Action a blank check that must be spent exclusively on furnishing the Sweet Dreams shelter. Can Community Action spend Mr. Oberon's donation on furnishings and count it toward match under the Emergency Solutions Grant ESG project? So again, Community Action has an ESG funded shelter. A donor has written a blank check that must be spent exclusively on furnishing the shelter. Can they count the donation of furnishings as a match? The answer is a little slow coming in. Okay, let's see. Cool, 60% yes, 40% no. No one is uncertain. Everyone is very confident. Let's have a look. The answer is, of course, yes. Furnishing is an eligible source, is an eligible cost. I'm sorry, for under ESG emergency shelter, and private donations are an eligible source of match for ESG, unless they explicitly prohibit matching, which is very unusual. Over to you, Mike.
Okay. So job counseling. CAI has identified that one of the largest barriers faced by residents of its Sweet Dreams shelter is job readiness. A local business owner, Portia, has offered to host a weekly 1-hour job counseling session for residents. Portia has determined that her time is worth $150 per hour. Can CAI recognize Portia's counseling session as match at a weekly rate of $150 per hour? So there's a couple of things going on in that question there. So think about those as you're coming up with your answer here. Can they do that? So specifically, when I say can they do that, can they match the counseling session at $150 an hour? Okay, we've got a pretty good distribution there. We've got 50% said maybe, which again, it's always a good answer with ESG questions. Looks like we've got a few more people saying yes than no outside of that. So let's see what the answer is. Maybe. Always the safe choice with ESG. Yeah, that is correct. The answer is maybe. Job counseling is an eligible expense under shelter, so it is eligible. So you've got that part taken care of. Portia donating her time to provide job counseling can be recognized as in-kind match. However, Services must be valued at a rate consistent with those ordinarily paid for similar work. So first you would look in the provider's organization. If you don't have someone providing similar work there, then you have to look for other employers providing similar work in the labor market. So the key there is it is eligible. It can be used as match, but you have to determine if $150 per group session is consistent with the rates paid for job counseling elsewhere, either in the organization or in the community, depending where you can get that from. If that is not the case, then CAI needs to value these group sessions differently than what Portia has valued them at here for purposes of match. So they need to come up with the fair market value of those and use that instead. And just from a best practice standpoint, I will say, if Portia has provided you documentation saying that this is worth $150, you're going to have to document that fair market value in a different way because you have to have good documentation for your match. So that would be something to keep in mind as well. And yeah, thank you, Gordon.
Yeah. All right. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are sick. Community Action and these two shelter residents have jointly determined that it is not feasible for them to visit a doctor's office, but also that they do not need inpatient treatment. A local health center that is 100% funded by the city has agreed, just this once, to send a nurse practitioner to examine and treat the residents on site. The health center is not charging Community Action for this service. Can Community Action recognize the actual cost to the health center as a match for its emergency shelter project? This one is also tricky. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are sick. Everybody's determined that they can't go to a doctor's office, but also that they don't need inpatient treatment. A local 100% city-funded health center has agreed to send a nurse practitioner to treat the residents on site. The health center is not charging Community Action for this service. Can Community Action recognize the cost to the health center as match? What do y'all think? Yeah, Mike, I think Tuesday got it at Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are sick. I think I saw the reaction emoji there. All right. 25% say yes, 75% say no. Let's find out. Yes is the answer, probably. Direct outpatient, and this is why this is complicated. Direct outpatient health services are an eligible cost under emergency shelter and can be recognized as in-kind match. And since the health center is 100% city funded, its services can match ESG unless the city says it can't, which is very unusual. The only restriction here is that outpatient health services are eligible only to the extent that other appropriate health services are unavailable. Since it's unlikely that other appropriate services are already available, the answer here is yes. But if other services were available, it would be no. And so what that means is all of this is completely kosher and great, except if there were already another clinic that did this kind of, we'll send out a nurse practitioner to handle this kind of service already, then it wouldn't be eligible as match, because you would effectively be duplicating services is the restriction there. And that's the same on paying for it yourself as it would be for paying with match. Tricky one. And actually one I ran into in Louisiana. So I empathize with you all. Okay, over to you, Mike.
So more things that could be donated. We will go over food and related services. So a local charitable organization, the Titania Club, runs a dinner program at the shelter every Friday night. The Titania Club provides volunteer servers and cleaners, plus they bring the food, flatware, and everything else. If the Titania Club were not providing servers and cleaners, CAI would be paying $15 an hour for those services. Can CAI recognize the weekly value of servers and cleaners at $15 an hour, plus the weekly actual costs of food, flatware, etc., as match for the ESG ES project. So you've got the labor there at $15 an hour, and you've got the actual goods, the food, flatware, etc. Can you use the value of those items as in-kind match in this scenario? All right, half of you said yes, had a few people said no, and a solid contingent of maybes. I will never blame anyone for answering maybe, because I keep saying it's the thing to do. But the answer here is yes, you can count these as in-kind match at the value that has been presented. Food, the supplies necessary for dispensing food, and the staff time necessary to prepare, serve, and clean up food are all eligible costs under emergency shelter for ESG. So you can recognize all of this as in-kind match when it's donated. And the big note here, the labor has been valued correctly because CAI would be paying $15 an hour for these services if they were not donated. Then they can recognize these donated services at that same amount, $15 per hour. So they have covered all their bases here with valuation and eligibility. So yes, this can all be used as match. And back to you, Gordon, for one more shelter question.
All right. Viola, a shelter resident, left Community Actions Shelter unexpectedly and was exited in HMIS more than a month ago. A partner organization has finally located Viola living in a park nearby. One of Community Actions Shelter volunteers, a person with lived experience who serves as a peer mentor, offers to meet with Viola and reconnect her with services, including shelter. If a community action staff person were providing these services, community action would be paying $15 an hour. Can community action recognize the shelter volunteers activities with Viola at $15 an hour as in-kind match for its emergency shelter project? This one's hard too, now that I'm looking at it. So Viola left shelter unexpectedly and was exited in HMIS more than a month ago. A partner organization located Viola in a park nearby. One of Community Action's volunteers offers to meet with Viola and reconnect her with services. If Community Action were providing those services, it would be paying $15 an hour. Can Community Action recognize the shelter volunteers activities with Viola at $15 an hour as in-kind match? Ooh, neat. We are evenly split, basically. 20% said yes, 40% no, 40% maybe. Let's see who was right. The answer is no. No, it cannot. While the cost of coordinating services for emergency shelter participants is an eligible cost, a shelter volunteer, as described, would be an appropriate person to provide these services. And Community Action is correctly accounting for the value of the volunteer's labor. Viola no longer qualifies as an emergency shelter participant. She's not living in a shelter, and she's not active in the shelters project in HMIS. So they can't use it as match for its emergency shelter project, though they could very much use it as match for an emergency shelter street outreach project. It's a tricky question. And it goes back to the expense eligibility piece of, you got to keep in mind that the elements of expense eligibility are you serving an eligible participant? Is the cost eligible under the ESG interim rule? And have you documented it in such a way that it demonstrates eligibility? And absent all three of those elements, an expense is not eligible, and match used for that expense can't be recognized.
You know, I like this one because it also speaks to some of the difficulty that you can face when you run multiple component projects. So if you have shelter and outreach, for instance, at one organization, you really have to be careful about making sure you're assigning match and reimbursable expenses too, for that matter, to the right project when you have staff members that cross between projects. Because in shelters, we know that shelters are often understaffed, and if they have street outreach too, it's very well likely they will have people crossing between projects. So it's something you have to be very wary of.
That's a great point, and absolutely true. And this part of incidentally why at the recipient level there's such a strong motive for you all to ask for timesheets that itemize time clearly by funding source, and not just by funding source, but by component within the funding source. Is it's a sort of a core way to make sure that your subs and sub-subs are keeping all of this straight. I think wraps up shelter. So where do you want to go next? Rapid is not an option. We already did that. So homelessness prevention or street outreach. I like this elect where you want to go next structure. I like this. If for no other reason than it tells me what y'all are thinking about and are concerned about, which is clearly rapid rehousing. All right, street outreach is up next. HP at the back of the line with 33%. So that's.
I think this model, Gordon, for the webinar is a very good example of client choice.
You're absolutely correct. All right. Street outreach mobile tablet donation. The local chapter of the Falstaff Society has donated 10 new mobile tablets to Community Action. Community Action intends to use these in its street outreach program to facilitate participant engagement in the field, including referring people to mainstream benefits and emergency shelter through HMIS and other web portals. Can Community Action count the retail cost of these mobile tablets as match for its street outreach project? The Falstaff Society, for those of you who are interested, is a real thing. It is in fact a real affiliation of comedians and comics. Yes, sort of originally, though we are speaking more specifically of our Shakespearean Falstaff. All right, 80% say yes, 20% say maybe, always a safe choice. Let's have a look. The answer is, of course, yes. Donated goods can absolutely be counted as non-cash match as long as they would be an eligible cost under ESG. Mobile tablets are an eligible expense under ESG street outreach as they facilitate, quote, building relationships with unsheltered homeless people and engaging them for the purpose of actively connecting and providing them information and referrals to programs targeted to folks like them and mainstream social services and housing programs, including emergency shelters. The reason the answer is yes is because the question very clearly outlines what it intends, what Community Action intends to use the mobile tablets for. If the question were framed a little differently, for example, we've got 10 new mobile tablets and we're going to do whatever we want with them, the answer would probably be maybe. It depends on what you're using them for. Mike, you are up. And actually, I'm going to have you take this one and the next one and the one after that, as our questions so far have been strongly knee balanced.
Okay, cool. So CAI's street outreach team owns a vehicle they use to conduct outreach. The vehicle breaks down, but luckily a community member named Gertrude is willing to loan CAI her van for a week while CAI's vehicle is being repaired. Gertrude is also willing to pay for fuel while her van is on loan. Can CAI count the cost of fuel as match for the street outreach project?
Oh, this one's wicked too. I was really on a tear when I was putting this one together. All of these questions are very challenging. And
The
you all are
van
doing,
part of it makes this one tough.
yeah. And you all are doing great, by the way. Like,
oh yeah,
credit where it's due. These are tough questions and you are navigating them ably well.
yeah. All right, we've got 67% said yes, and a few said no, and an equal amount of few said maybe. So let's see what the answer is. The majority is right there. The answer is yes. And the reason for that, of course, donated goods can be counted as non-cash match as long as they're an eligible cost. And under ESG, and this is wording from the regulation, purchasing vehicle fuel would be an eligible expense because funds can be used for the costs of purchasing or leasing a vehicle for the recipient or subrecipient. And you can see the reasoning here. So it's transporting staff or participants, but that includes the cost of gas, insurance, taxes, and maintenance for the vehicle. I will note that since this is a loaned vehicle, there probably needs to be some documentation in writing that that vehicle is being loaned to the program for program purposes. I think that would be a necessary supplement to document this fuel as match, but the fuel is an eligible cost and it is being used for transporting staff and participants for the street outreach program. So it is an eligible item for match. I guess I will take the next one too. So now we're talking about case management. Prince Hal owns a summer home in California. After a period of indecision, he makes a very large donation to CAI to fund case management for people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, with the stipulation that case management should continue until the person is housed or sheltered. Can CAI count Prince Hal's donation as match for its street outreach project? Oh, this was your favorite one, Gordon? This is a good one.
It's making people think.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Yep. It's tricky.
All right. Again, 67% saying yes, and the same spread as last time, actually. We've got 17% saying no and maybe. So a strong yes contingency there. Let's see the answer. It is maybe. The answer on this one is maybe. So at a high level, case management is an eligible cost for street outreach, and there's no statutory limit on how long street outreach can serve a participant. But specific eligible case management and engagement activities are limited by terms like initial, urgent, and actively. So this is where the project proposal with HCD and ESG written standards and projects, policies, and procedures come in. So all that stuff we've been talking about over time, your written standards, your policies and procedures, and the language in the contract. That all comes into play here. The next question to ask is, does Prince Hal's donation fund activities that fit within all of those things I just said? So you've got, again, contract language, written standards, policies, and procedures. To the extent that the answer is yes, the donation can be used as match. So what we're saying is there's no real statutory reason here that it couldn't be used as match, but you might have other language in these other places that limit things around street outreach. And so you have to make sure that this is an eligible expense in every way. And if the answer to that is yes, then yes, this can be used as match. All right, what do we have next? Inpatient hospital stays. The local public hospital has recognized that a disproportionate number of their super users are people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. After speaking with CAI, the hospital's CEO, Lago, has agreed to write off the cost, of inpatient stays that are less than or equal to 3 days for participants in CAI's street outreach project. Can CAI count the waived cost of inpatient hospital stays as matched towards its street outreach project? So they waived those inpatient hospital stays. Can the value of those stays be counted as match towards the street outreach project? I wonder if we'll have the same proportion here. Not quite. 67% still said yes, but we had a lot more people lump on to no, and so 33% of you said no. So let's see what the answer is. Yep, the answer here is a definitive no. That cannot be used as match. Why not? Because inpatient treatment is not an eligible cost under street outreach. So that one's a pretty clear-cut one.
Yep. The only thing I would add to that is the reason this is a tricky question is it's such an obviously good idea for the hospital, and it's such an obviously good idea for the participants that it's counterintuitive for it not to count as match, right? This is a clear good for everybody involved, and yet it's not eligible as match, which is another drop in the very large bucket of don't try to intuit the right answer when it comes to ESG. Don't apply logic, don't try and intuit the answer. Read what the regulations actually say, because in absence of those, you're gonna think yourself into the wrong corner, and it happens to the best of us, the worst of us, and everybody in between.
Yeah, very easy to do.
Okay, and I think this is the last of our street outreach ones. Juliet, the local public hospital CFO, volunteers with Community Action and hears about the problem with the inpatient stays being ineligible under street outreach. She suggests that the hospital instead loan staff to Community Action's outreach team for in-the-field outpatient treatment. Can Community Action count the salaries of hospital staff providing outpatient treatment to street outreach participants as match for its street outreach project? What do you think?
I wonder if anyone has pulled out their copy of the ESG program interim rule to reference during this yet.
I must admit, if I were in the audience for this, I would absolutely be treating this like an open book test. Control F, straight through the interim rule. All right, neat. 60% yes, 40% maybe, no knows. Let's see what we knows. The answer is, of course, yes. Outpatient treatment provided by licensed medical professionals operating in places where unsheltered homeless people are living is an eligible cost under ESG street outreach, which means that the donated cost of staff time to do this would absolutely be eligible. Good job to that hospital's CFO. Which takes us to one remaining option. We'll kind of breeze through homelessness prevention quickly and then take a few minutes for questions at the end. Over to you, Mike.
Okay. So, more questions about cars. Katharina has received an eviction notice because she is behind on her rent. She is behind on her rent because she lost shifts and the consequent income as a result of her car breaking down. Her landlord has agreed to halt the eviction if she pays the back due rent, which she could do if her car was repaired. So these are those situations we see with people facing housing instability all the time. One thing leads to another. A longtime CAI donor has agreed to pay the car repairs out of pocket. Can CAI count the cost of Katharina's car repairs as match toward its homelessness prevention project? All right, that's pretty good spread. So 29% saying yes, 57% no, and then 14% maybe. Let's see what the answer here is. The majority has it. The answer is, in fact, no on this one. So while Katharina is eligible to be served under homelessness prevention because she is currently facing eviction, car repairs are not an eligible cost. So as such, they can't be counted as match. A really good note here is that this is a great example of a space where ESG can't be involved, but flexible funding can have a significant impact, because clearly, if her car were repaired, that could very well lead to her getting out of the eviction and maintaining her housing. So it goes back to the logic thing. This might not be eligible. We can't do anything about that, even though it makes complete sense to help fix her car in this scenario. Flexible funding, it would be an amazing thing to have in this situation.
All right. Laertes is currently living with relatives without a lease. His relatives have told him that he needs to leave within 14 days. Laertes has identified a new housing unit to rent and has saved up enough to pay for the first month's rent, but he can't afford the security deposit, which is equal to 2 months' rent. The city has a security deposit fund to help people move into affordable housing. The fund is paid for using local tax revenue and has no grant matching restrictions. If the security deposit fund pays for Laertes' security deposit, can community action count it as match toward its homelessness prevention project? That's a tricky one, lots of twists and turns. Excited to see the answers. I have confidence in you all, I have faith. That was so quick. 100% of you say yes. And you are absolutely right. Good job. Very proud. Homelessness prevention can only serve, as you well know, people who meet the Cat 2 definition of homelessness, for which this participant qualifies, even if he doesn't have an active lease. Homelessness prevention can pay for security deposits up to 2 months of rent. And local tax revenue usually has no matching restrictions and can therefore be used to match ESG. Good job, everybody. Over to you, Mike.
All right. Marcus's landlord has threatened to evict him if he doesn't pay his rent arrears. Marcus owes 6 months of back rent. He also needs rental assistance moving forward. CAI wants to pay for the first half of each of the rental arrears and rent assistance. The Triumvirate Charitable Trust, a private foundation, has agreed to pay the rest. Can CAI count the Triumvirate's contribution as match for its homelessness prevention project? So you've got the project wants to pay half, charitable trust wants to pay the rest. Is the charitable trust portion eligible as match? We have 80% yes and 20% maybe. Let's see what the answer is here. The answer is no. That was a bit of a trick question. So, getting caught on that one is certainly not a bad thing. It is a tricky question. But Marcus doesn't qualify for homelessness prevention because he isn't at imminent risk. So he needs to be able to document that he is going to lose his housing within 14 days. There is a broader at-risk category 2, which I'm sorry, that's going to be confusing. Let me reword. Aside from category 2, there is a broader definition called at risk, but even for that, he would not qualify in this instance, so he does not qualify at all. If his landlord gets an eviction order, he does qualify, but he can't be served under homelessness prevention right now, so therefore any private money spent on helping him cannot be used as match for ESG homelessness prevention. So important to keep in mind, eligibility is a thing. If the person's not eligible for the program, nothing spent on them is eligible for match, regardless of whether it's an eligible cost under ESG or not.
All right. Octavian is in the same situation as Marcus. 6 months of back due rent, needs rent assistance, but his landlord has secured an eviction order. Octavian will lose his housing in 7 days. Community Action and the Triumvirate have agreed to split the costs. Each will pay half of Octavian's rent arrears and rent assistance, with the Triumvirate's donation going directly to Community Action. Can Community Action count the Triumvirate's donation as a match for its homelessness prevention project? Excuse me. Okay, about half and half, yes and maybe. Let's have a look. The answer is, of course, now yes. Unlike Marcus, Octavian qualifies for homelessness prevention. And so unless the Triumvirate prohibits using its dollars as ESG match, it's absolutely kosher. Recognizing the time, I'm going to go ahead and skip us to the end of our, oh, there was just the one left. Oh no, I accidentally hit a thing and took us back. I'm going to go ahead and stop our screen share and just take us into human faces. We've got a couple of minutes left to cover any outstanding questions. So this would be the time. Drop them in the chat. Come off mute. Happy to help. Was this useful? Was this too much? I would love if anybody had any informal feedback on, like, this was pitched at our level, this was like way too much, we're masters, move along. Any of that would be very valuable if you feel comfortable sharing.
I thought it was useful. It's mostly, actually, a lot of it was really a question about what's eligible. And it largely was about what's eligible in different activities. But what I tend to see on my request for funds for the match is the same thing over and over again. It doesn't change much from month to month for their match.
Yeah, well, it's I think that's the reality is organizations, there's a strong tendency for them to identify their source of match, lock in with it, and just keep on going. Because if it worked last time, why would we not want to do it again next time? Yeah, that's kind of what I would take with that. Tony, did you have a question?
No.
Cool.
Yeah,
Connie, I see. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is, with rapid rehousing, you can't use it with other subsidy sources. So how does match work in that case?
So try and reframe that a little more specifically, because it's a good question, but I'm trying to get at what you're getting at.
Right, like I'm looking at the regs for rapid rehousing. And at the bottom, it says it can't be used with other subsidies.
Yes. So what it's talking about is you can't serve a person with two different rental assistance subsidies. So a person can't split their rent, for example, between a Section 8 voucher and an ESG rapid voucher. It doesn't mean that you can't use other federal sources, just that their rental assistance can't be split between multiple rental assistance subsidy programs. But note that that's just talking about rental assistance subsidies. There are other elements of the rapid rehousing program that absolutely can come from other sources. And that ranges from things that aren't rental assistance, like housing. It's the housing relocation and stabilization services piece that can come from elsewhere. The other thing to remember, though, is that we talked a lot about match. Like you've got a rapid project, so you're looking for rapid match. But match doesn't care. And in many cases, organizations will use administrative costs as their match, right? So if you've got a rapid project for $100,000, your match requirement is $100,000. And some of that might be like rapid matching costs. But it could just be that they're going to pay for like their budget person and their grant reporting and compliance person, and all of their match will come out of admin. And that's completely okay. Because again, match is accounted for at the recipient level, not the subrecipient level, and not the sub-subrecipient level, unless you structure your contract that way. And so from HCD's perspective, you don't really care where the match is coming, which component the match falls within, as long as it's eligible participant, eligible ESG cost, and documented somewhere. Yeah, Connie, I see you there.
So if we get so what we see, one of our grantees just puts they were awarded, let's say, $150,000 for a contract year, or for their contract. They're putting in their match box, which we have on our RFF, the little match box and what the source is. Most grantees, they'll say, oh, I'm asking for $10,000 in rapid rehousing this RFF. So I'm matching 10,000, they'll give us a source. One of them just says 150,000 and they give a match source. So they're giving us just a blanket, and they do that every RFF for that term of that contract. I feel like we need more, but.
Well, that's so if you feel like you need more.
I don't know enough about it. That's what I'm asking you. Is we're getting
Sure.
the grantee heard in office hours she was questioning us. She said, am I not supposed to do that? Diane, are you here? Maybe Diana's gone. It was only kindness, I think, that's doing it, asked us.
Sure. You know, it really is ultimately up to what HCD wants to do. And I know that that's your least favorite answer, but the reality is it is at HCD's discretion. From a compliance perspective, from HUD's perspective, the requirement is that HCD has to, during the period of the contract, come up with match equal to the amount of the contract less $100,000 that you pass down to your recipient who most needs it, your subrecipient who most needs it. Beyond that, you can account for it at the end of the contract, you can account for it throughout, you can account for it differently depending on different subrecipients according to your contracts. There's no one right way to do it. The question is ultimately, what do you think will get you to a place where you're, from my perspective, if it was me, and it was once upon a time, my main concern was always making sure that I felt confident that when it came time at the end of the year or during an annual monitoring for me to look at match documentation, that I would find something that was good, right? That I would have good backup documentation there. And whatever policy was in place needed to be sufficient to establish that, but not overstep it. Whether for you that means you're going to ask for everything every time, or on a quarterly basis ask for everything, or spot check them once a month, every 3 months, or just do a check during the annual monitoring, that's going to be up to you. And it's something that can change over time. Good question. All good questions. Anything else? I know we're a little over. Anything else anybody else has on the subject of match? I know that we can, I'm sure that we will keep talking about match. It's not a two and done conversation, put it like that. Okay, well, thank you all. We appreciate your time. As always, it's a pleasure spending time with you, and we're excited to continue diving into these topics. I think next time we have invoice review coming up, invoice review overview coming up. Don't hold me to it, but I think that's what's on the calendar. Other than that, stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. Erin, you can go ahead and cut the recording, and we'll move right along.